Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Rich Allen and Peter Rutzler. Unfortunately, today's show won't be focused just on matters on the field, as incidents off it hog the headlines really at the moment, and probably rightly so. So we start tonight in Amiens, where 5 Lyon fans were seriously injured after a barrier collapsed while they were celebrating their side's goal on 15 minutes. Several other fans were injured, as well as a steward, and the game was abandoned. Amiens president Joannin said in the aftermath, 500 Lyon fans wanted to get on the pitch. The barrier was in perfect condition. Since then, Monsieur Joannin has apologised for those comments, saying that his words were clumsy and ill-measured, and rightfully so. The incident has brought with it a number of questions into the how, what, and why, but these topics are very important, really, to talk about, Rich. For those who aren't regular viewers of Ligue 1 football, fans rushing to the front of stands is something we see pretty much in every ground and in every game. But is that kind of behaviour, should it continue? And it has to be partially to blame for this, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to. You're going to be coming across as sort of trying to point any fingers of blame. It was just an unfortunate accident, and unfortunately, it seems as though those that were seriously injured and taken to hospital, I think, all have now been released. So I think it could have been far worse than it's actually turned out to be. But it was certainly an alarming incident. I mean, we see it all the time. You know, numerous. I mean, Saint-Etienne is probably the one a lot of people can picture. Nantes, I suppose, as well, are the two main ones where you really see it, where the goals scored, and the sort of more hardcore fans who are normally situated at either end will rush forward, and to the perhaps more casual view, it does look quite dangerous. It is dangerous. You know, there can be all sorts that go wrong with it, but it's obviously something that happens week in, week out. And yeah, hundreds of fans rush forward. It doesn't look good. I've still not quite got accustomed to seeing it and thinking, how is there not more injuries as a result of this? Because it's Saint-Etienne and Nantes, attract decent crowds, and it's a sea of people that swarm forward. And with Amiens v Lille being as local a derby as you can sometimes get in France, there were a significant number of Lille fans in a very small part of a already very small ground. And of course, what that presented itself was that when the goal came in, you had a lot of fans being funneled into a small gap as they rushed forward. And unfortunately, in this instance, the pressure on that barrier just got too much. It may trigger a wider review into how these work. A lot of these grounds, the seats are just rows of concrete with a little plastic padding put on for to highlight where the seat is. So it's easy to stand. We all see to stadiums and all that come in around. Have come in around Europe. There's still standing that goes on. And of course, with there not being these rows of neat and proper and definitive seats, it's very easy to rush forward when a goal's scored. So I have a feeling it may trigger a wider review, but I'm not sure this one incident will trigger a widespread halting of those kind of celebrations.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the barrier as well, Peter, because admittedly to the Amiens president Joannin, he did make some questionable comments in the initial aftermath, but he has since apologised and admittedly so, and we shouldn't tarnish for him for that. But he's also probably defending his club that have been promoted twice, haven't got the enormous budget that some other clubs have, or frankly, they've probably got a lot less than anyone who's got a very small budget in Ligue 1 sometimes. And in all honesty, should there be more stringent checks on these barriers so these kind of incidents don't happen?
Well, on a basic level, the answer should be yes, because as people who watch Ligue 1 all the time, we are familiar with it, and like Rich was saying, it is something that is very difficult to become accustomed to. I remember when I first started watching Ligue 1 more regularly. And then you watch at Saint-Etienne, the one that sticks in my mind the most, because that was the first one I noticed it happening. And when they score and they do rush forward, it is something so dramatic and such a strong movement of people. And of course, we're coming from a culture where we've got Hillsborough sort of ingrained in us, in our mindset when it comes to fan safety. So in terms of should there be better safety checks, well, plainly, yes, there has to be. And it's got to be accepted that this is part of French footballing culture among supporters. Obviously, this isn't the first time these kind of incidents have happened. There have been like minor ones. I think Bordeaux had 2 in 2015, I think, looking back. And there was an incident at Lille as well with only a small number of injuries, but never as serious as this. But you're right to bring up the wider issues of finances, especially with a club like Amiens, who have had back-to-back promotions. With this instance in particular, there was the fact that the fans fell about 1.5 meters, I think it is, which is quite dramatic, and that's why the images that we saw were so on the event itself, and why so many people were injured. It's a difficult one, because if you suddenly look for wholesale changes and you start looking wider and say, well, we can't have this, you can't have fans rushing forward, you can't, all stadiums must be all-seater. There are a number of clubs who financially just cannot afford to do that. I think in Amiens' case themselves, I think they've bought, is it 2,000 seats of Evian, I think, and they are in a process of, or I don't know if they've completed it now, of renovating the Stade de la Lincoln. So, and that gives you an idea of where they're at. And I think there are a number of clubs in France who are redeveloping their stadiums at the moment. But financially, for Amiens, it's a huge weight, and it's not just the case of there's so many things that come into mind when you get promoted, and it's not just the case of we've got to sort our stadium out. You've got the playing squad. I mean, the jump from Ligue 2 to Ligue 1 is very high, and it's for the LFP to suddenly introduce wholesale changes would be, without any kind of support, would be very difficult, I think, to fully implement. And there are alternatives they can look at. I was just looking up at what other ideas are out there, and of course there's a debate at the moment in English football about the reintroducing safe standing, similar to what they have in Scotland with barriers, which would prevent this kind of movement. So that would entail a change in how supporters act behind the goals in away stands. But for Amiens, I think being promoted, not just in terms of the infrastructure needs to improve, but by being in Ligue 1, you're going to get bigger away support. I mean, they had Marseille visit a couple of weeks ago. They brought 500 fans. They were doing the same thing. Lille bring 500, and the barrier itself is given way. So quite clearly there are some fundamental issues with the actual structuring of the ground. But these are things that, especially for a club that's jumped 2 divisions, would need to get their head around quite quickly. And that all of these things will be assessed, and I think the inquiry starts on Thursday. But there could be some serious ramifications for Amiens, which you could understand, of course, because this is a very serious event to happen. But there are other issues at play here, especially financially, as we've mentioned.
Yeah, and I think Peter brings up a very good point, in the sense that financially it can be very difficult. And although fan safety should be absolutely at the top of every list, staying in Liga is as important financially for clubs, because you look at teams like recent memory, like Avion and Bastia, that have fell out of the league, and as soon as they've fallen out of that Ligue 1 bubble, they've absolutely collapsed. And you do fear for some clubs sometimes if that kind of thing happens again, don't you, Rich? That yes, fan safety should be important, but a lot of clubs are focusing on trying to get as good a squad as they can to remain in that league, to then gain financial support to do those kind of things.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's well documented how menacing and sort of punishing the DNCG can be. That obviously look into and make sure that these clubs are operating, in a way that makes financial sense. But I do think at the smaller end of the scale, as we see a larger, this larger gulf of money coming in at the top end of the league, there's naturally going to have to be, plenty of teams that are going to be missing out on all these luxuries. And I think that there then needs to be a look at, well, we need to put in place these supports. You've seen, obviously, in the Premier League, these clubs that get relegated, the parachute payments. We can't compare because the TV money in England is obviously just at another level, another 4 or 5 levels above where Ligue 1 is. But I do think that, the DNCG, I use them as the example, with them being the financial arm of the governing body, that they're very quick to pounce on those that, once they're in trouble. It's perhaps, should they be also helping those so they don't get into that troublesome spot? Should it have come to a point where, Bastia, Evian, and there's been plenty of others lower down the leagues and lower down the divisions as well. Should it be that they've got into that point, or should there be some, if the DNCG is there to punish those that get into that kind of state, should they also be there to try and prevent as well? I'm not going to say that this incident will cause all sorts of reviews of how fans behave at stadiums, on how stadiums themselves are designed and kept up to date. But we're right that these are all questions that should be asked, and all ways that we can think about. How can things like this? We don't want to see things like this. Of course, we don't want to see things like this. And as I said earlier, we're incredibly fortunate that actually there wasn't far worse repercussions from this. But let's almost use this to have these kind of debates, but obviously at a much more senior level where there can actually be some decisions implemented. But certainly from a financial perspective, I can see why clubs are perhaps slightly put off in Vettel. It makes them sound like they're being, they're doing this on purpose. Of course, the way that Amiens run the club, of course, they're not intending that things like this fail, but decided, well, instead of doing this around the ground, we need to invest in actually signing this player. And I think the key thing, I think, for me is that we see this disparity at the top of the table with so much money coming in and numbers that are getting to sort of Premier League level and beyond of eye-wateringness, that these smaller clubs like Amiens, like Dijon, all those kind of clubs that are at the bottom of the table, that are of course not going to be able to go anywhere near the level of financial benefit that the other teams have, just perhaps have that little bit of support. So, fingers crossed that we see positive changes from this, from what was obviously a very, dramatic and traumatic incident. But we should just have to wait and see, I think.
I think it's also important to mention quickly that the Stade de la Ligue did pass the safety checks from the LFP when they were promoted. So we're not looking at a stadium that's dilapidated. I mean, it is a relatively modern design as well. So there's been some kind of something's been missed, or there's been some kind of fault with inspection. So I think that's also important to bear in mind, because we're thinking about how safety checks in Liga are viewed. And
yeah, I think when you actually looked at the area that the Lille fans had in that, it was almost a funnel shape, and so of course you had wider row of people coming down into a much narrower section, and of course obviously that pressure. But so yeah, it may be that safety checks aren't necessarily going to pick up on these. It has to actually be it's a design fault rather than an actual failure in the quality of the stadium. It's that you're going to have, Amiens are not going to be attracting big numbers of away fans every game, but they have to think that your bigger clubs and then your more local clubs are going to bring the maximum allocation that they can have, and thinking how fans can celebrate goals having that sort of funnel shape. It just the physics of it just don't work, and of course the pressure that builds up on things like the barrier sadly can very often only lead to one outcome.
Yeah, I think that's as much to do with the LFP as it is to do with Amiens and in terms of their safety checks.
Yeah, and I think that brings up an excellent point that I want to finish with, Peter. And that's, you did mention when they obviously are doing a review later this week, and they could fine Amiens for this incident. But shouldn't this be an excellent chance for the LFP to do something right and possibly, instead of fining Amiens, say that this should be a time for them to help invest in them in doing the stadium a little bit better? And should they maybe doing a little bit more in the terms of doing the safety, or hopefully renewing whatever the safety checks they were doing, but doing more in terms of investing in clubs to give them a bit of that cash back? Because while it might lie on the club's hands, it definitely also lands on the shoulders of the LFP as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that backs up what Rich was saying in terms of where the money is going in Ligue. And this isn't really a time really to be punishing a side like Amiens, who have made a double leap. And they could face a fine, which they struggle to pay. They could face a points deduction, which could have huge ramifications for them come the end of the season, or even a stadium closure, which again has financial problems. And it's like we were just saying, it's as much to do with safety checks, as much to do with failings, not just with Amiens, but with also the LFP. I mean, if they passed all the right boxes and they've had them all ticked, then it's, you can't just throw the book at Amiens because the book itself has got a problem. So, yeah, in an ideal world, you'd love the LFP to turn around and say, right, we're going to help you out. But I don't see that happening. But I don't think at the same time that punitive measures are the right thing in this instance.
Yeah, hopefully this can be a lesson for plenty to learn here, because that's what really should be happening here. And I also want to close this out. Obviously, we're saying pretty much the obvious. We wish the best for anyone who was injured, and especially those that were seriously injured, and thank God that it wasn't more serious, because it could have been a real disaster. But now let's turn things back to things on the field. And before that, we'll look at the news from the weekend. And Monaco continued their European hangover with a 1-1 draw with Montpellier, which saw Souleymane Camara score in added time to seal a point. PSG kicked off action on Saturday with a second 6-2 victory of the season, this time against Bordeaux. All of the 4 forwards got on the score sheet, with Neymar on penalty duties this time around. Away from Amiens, the multiplex saw 2 1-0 wins for Nantes over Metz, their 5th win in 6, while Caen notched that scoreline away to Rennes, pushing them into the European places. Guingamp and Toulouse fought out a 1-1 draw, while Martin Terrier scored late on to earn Strasbourg a point away to 10-man Dijon. On Sunday, Troyes managed a 2-1 win against Saint-Etienne, despite playing almost an hour with a man down. However, Les Verts kindly levelled up the sides as Hernani was sent off 5 minutes from time. Lyon threw away yet another lead against Angers as they drew 3-3 again. Marcelo was sent off in the second half in somewhat farcical fashion, and Legon have failed to win in any of their last 5 in all competitions, their worst run under Bruno Genesio. The game that closed out the weekend was in Nice as the hosts lost 4-2 to Marseille, much to the chagrin of Mario Balotelli, if you've seen the video. Alisson Player also missed a penalty as l'OM held out despite losing Luis Gustavo to a red card in the second half. And that's all the news. But remember, to stay up to date with all your French football news, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFM. So moving back to matters on the field, really, and Paris Saint-Germain ended on Bordeaux's unbeaten start to the season with a 6-2 spanking. Neymar back and even taking penalties now. But this was another free-flowing performance, Rich, that feels like they're really clicking into place.
Absolutely. I'd argue that this, certainly going forward, was one of the best PSG performances I've seen for some time. Certainly, I think their best performance, by a long way, I think their best performance this season. I thought the formation that they had, the personnel that they had, the way that they played was really, really good to watch. This is the style of play that we want to see from this PSG side. These score lines should be getting to a point where they're no longer a shock. they have that much quality over the other sides. Really, really impressed with Draxler's performance. He's become a bit of a sort of maligned, marginalised figure, I think, with obviously the arrivals of Neymar and Mbappe to work alongside Cavani. So really, really impressed with his performance. I thought he took his goal absolutely superbly. If you haven't seen it, I implore you to check it out. I know, Neymar scoring a free kick will of course take all the sort of the retweets and all this, that, and the other, but Draxler's finish was absolutely super. There's a camera angle from the opposite, or the corner where the ball ends up, and it's a volley on the outside, just ever so slightly on the outside of his left foot, and the way it just curls in it's a real joy to watch. But his all-round game was really, really good. Created opportunities, created a goal. He was, he just fitted into that system perfectly alongside Neymar, Mbappe, Cavani. It just worked. By then having no Thiago Motta in the side, it allowed Rabiot and Verratti to sort of have those positions just in front of the defence. For me, the whole system just worked. There were little sketchy moments, I think, defensively speaking. Bordeaux certainly created more opportunities than their 2 goals were to show for. But all in all, really, really impressed with the PSG performance. I think to follow that on from obviously such a resounding display against Bayern Munich in the Champions League, this is the, as I said before, this is the PSG that we expect to see now.
Yeah, the German was effervescent in that middle of the park. He was absolutely excellent. But Peter, there's other players in that front four that were frightening at times. I mean, Cavani grabs his goal and played reasonably well. Neymar had little touches here and there. He scores a fantastic free kick and notches a penalty, which he'll be at least highlighted by, as well as hugging the Uruguayan on plenty of occasions in front of the cameras as much as he could. And Mbappe, again, had little touches here and there that set up little pieces, especially that goal for Cavani. There was just that bit of link-up play again between those 4 that just shows that they could be really, really dangerous on their day this season.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree fully with what Rich was saying. And it's very interesting looking at Draxler and how well he did. And, we like to talk about trios up front, but there's no reason why PSG can't have a top quad or a top 4. And if they have so many options to choose from, and Draxler really put his name well and truly at the forefront of choices for Emery. It's been a great week for PSG, and what a difference a week can make. They've gone from the feud, and they drew last week against Montpellier, and it was a really tepid performance, to a week of dismantling Bayern Munich midweek with some sensational counter-attacking play, and then obviously putting on this show at the weekend at the Parc des Princes, putting 6 past Bordeaux, which, I mean, Bordeaux started very well, and they do have some issues defensively, but they are a strong side by Ligue 1 standards. And I agree fully with Rich. PSG should be doing this week in, week out with the squad they have, but to do it after the week they've had and the difficulties, and then to put on a show like that, I think was superb, and be such a boost for Emery as well, who will have come under a lot of pressure this week, not least from his own players. But yeah, I think in terms of there are still some issues that PSG will have to look at. I think one way of addressing the midfield dearth of players is to use 2 of them and then use 4 attackers, which we saw, and it worked very, very well. We're interested to see what they do in the Champions League, and I don't think Motta could continue to play every week at his age as well. And their only other backup option is Nkunku, and he's only played a couple of games this season. He's only got a handful of minutes, so there is still that sort of lingering anxiety. I mean, defensively, they're still not the strongest. I don't think Areola doesn't inspire that much confidence in me. He's definitely the best option they've got. But I think looking at the back 4 in front of them, the first goal they conceded was poor. For a side like PSG, you don't want to be conceding goals like that. Not clearing a corner. The whole of the back line had switched off. You had Rabiot just strolling out, and they were caught by a Bordeaux side who are effective going forward. And then the second goal was a poor challenge from Meunier. So there are issues to tweak, but in terms of Ligue 1, they shouldn't really be issues when you've got so much power and potential up front that they should be walking the division. And I know you were looking at, could they go the season unbeaten, and there is no reason why they can't, especially considering that, you know, with Monaco floundering a little bit, maybe their over-reliance on Falcao was showing through. They didn't have a good, didn't play well against Montpellier the other night, so I can't see them. They would probably be their strongest challenger in terms of an actual fixture, and even they, you know, against that front four or three or whatever Emery goes for, I don't see them really causing PSG any trouble. So a really heartening performance, but I think especially for Emery, especially after the week before last.
Yeah, not to toot his horn anymore because we've already mentioned him plenty, but Draxler dropping a little bit deeper on occasions and driving with the ball was a real help for them, even in a great performance anyway. I think that leaves the door open for Pastore to still be a player in that area if they need to be, but it might even shut the door on Di Maria. He might be looking for the exit door very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to add that. I thought it was, Di Maria came on, offered nothing. You had Lo Celso come on, produced a wonderful little dink ball for Neymar. I mean, he only came on for a few minutes towards the end, but a beautiful dink ball for Neymar, who almost got his hat trick with it. So for me, Draxler's form, what we know Pastore can do in that more sort of central, sort of a number 10 kind of role, what Lo Celso can offer off the bench. We've seen it a couple of times already this season, what he can offer off the bench. For me, can only spell an exit for Di Maria in January.
And with Lucas being big pals with Neymar and maybe being a bit more similar to him and Mbappe in terms of being a good option for quick counters, I think he might just stick around as to be an extra squad player as well, to be fair. So I think Di Maria might be looking for the exit door. But Peter briefly touched on it there, Rich, and I do want to bring this question to you. Are there signs that PSG could go undefeated this season in Liga?
If I'm perfectly honest, I feel like that should be what they do. That's I keep banging on about that attacking, certainly the attacking talent they've got, the investment they've made in that squad. There is absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be going unbeaten. I almost think it should be something that's borderline expected of this squad. Who is going to beat them? That day at the office last week against Montpellier, I don't see too many of those, if I'm perfectly honest. They're only going to strengthen in January. And to be perfectly honest, that's going to be in the area, well, you would hope anyway, that's going to be in the areas that they need to, which is, in defence and sort of slightly deeper midfield positions. So, to be perfectly honest, they should be. They really should be. I don't see where a defeat for this side is coming from.
It's tough to see it from anywhere at the moment, isn't it? But Peter, let's touch on Bordeaux as well. But they've had a great start to the season, and this was always going to be a tough game. But did the speed, especially of PSG's attacks, and sometimes the ease they cut through them, expose that Bordeaux have a really, really slow back line?
Yeah, I think it did a little bit. I think Gourvenec's comments after the game saying about, the free kicks stunned them, and then the whole, facing Neymar, Cavani and Mbappe just sunk in that moment sort of thing. I don't really see how that can add up entirely. I mean, a lot of sides would be galvanised by that. But there are definitely some, if we are to point out weaknesses in that Bordeaux side, it is in the back line. And I think it was Toulalan and Jovanovic who were partnered at centre half, and Jovanovic is still very young, and Toulalan is very old, and I think as not being a natural central defender, that is a slight disadvantage, and against forwards of the calibre of Neymar and Cavani and Mbappe, and the bench and the reserves as well at PSG, there's always that risk of being exposed. I do think they were a bit like a rabbit caught in the headlights a little bit. I do feel like they never really showed what they could have done. I think if they had been a bit more solid and they could have held out for a little longer, you've got a different game, especially with their attacking potential, because they do have a lot of attacking potential, and we saw that with the 2 goals they scored. But there was some real class from PSG in that first half. We shouldn't take away from that as well. Underlined by the goals of Neymar and especially Draxler. And I concur with Rich about how good that was. The technique was sensational.
I do have to admit, I mentioned this a couple of times this season, but Toulalan, I think is a fantastic player, and it has been in the past, but he can't be a centre-back. His lack of pace really, really puts someone in a disadvantage, in that time and time again, PSG took advantage of it. Anyone with a quick strike force will now look at that as a template of how to get at this Bordeaux side. And in all honesty, they either have to drop him now or move him into that midfield place where if someone does take him on, at least there's players behind him. The problem now is if a player takes Toulalan on, they're on in goal. And yes, they've got Costil in net, which is better than they've had recently, at least anyway. But it's not really enough, and it's going to cost them games if they do want to find the Champions League places. They need to sort that out sooner and later, rather than later. But we've mentioned it briefly already as well, which is Monaco's result this weekend, where they again found the conquerors that seem to be Montpellier at the moment. Rich, with the loss in midweek as well to Porto at home, which was several different counter-attacks and then being caught on the break, and again, Glick was a little bit exposed for speed, and Montpellier did it a few times again and were maybe just a little bit unlucky. Are teams finally figuring out the Principality side?
I think it's a combination of that, and it's a combination of the squad as a whole. Perhaps not necessarily the starting 11, but certainly the squad as a whole, just getting used to, I think, what happened, obviously, with all of last season and the success that brought. And then obviously the major changes that occurred during the summer. I think there is still a period of the squad getting used to. They obviously worked so hard, once the season got underway and there was success there. But I think they're now just experiencing that little bit of a lull whereby they've realised, actually, this is a new squad. We need to perhaps, we can't play how we played last season. If we're going to try that, teams are easily going to pick us off, and that's what we've seen once or twice this season. But I think it was almost to be expected. These kind of performances, I just expected them. Week 1, week 2. I didn't necessarily expect them week 7, week 8. But I don't. It's certainly not panic stations for Monaco, but it's certainly something that Jardim and his team need to look at. This can't be. They can't allow, any kind of habitual drops in performances. I also wonder how much of it is a sort of resignation to the fact that, the league title has gone already. Is there a little bit of, do they automatically seem to perhaps assume that second place is wrapped up, and therefore, are we seeing glimpses of foot off gas syndrome kind of thing? It's those kind of things that I start to question. You didn't expect that of the Monaco side last season. Maybe there's a bit of naivety, I think, in this side, perhaps. There's certainly questions to be asked. Absolutely certainly questions to be asked. They're stupid as it seems to say. They're not the same team as last season. They have to adapt, and they've adapted in sorts. But I think they really need to really look at how they play, the style of play that Jardim will implement in that side, and just make sure it's fitting those new players that they brought. Those new players can sort of fall into that system, because if not, then Jardim has to recognise that sooner rather than later to revise that system to get the best out of everyone.
I think that the Marseille result may have been a little bit of a red herring for how good Monaco really are. I think building up to that result, they were scoring goals, but a lot of their goals were coming from set pieces. There is a heavy reliance on Falcao, and I think once they smashed Marseille, everyone was thinking, Monaco, they're the same as last year, and it sort of masked the transitions that are going on that you were just mentioning there, Rich. Those sort of the players in different positions. You know, they've got new forwards. You've got Ronnie Lopez coming in trying to take the place of Bernardo Silva. Defensively, they've had to make changes as well. And I think that may have just slightly altered the lens with which we've been looking at Monaco. And of course, they're one of the main events that sort of shook it was their defeat to Nice. And then obviously Montpellier, they seem to have a knack of getting points off the big sides in Ligue so far this season. So, but maybe it's a flash in the pan, and we'll see Monaco improve. And I expect they will with transitions. But I think there is definitely that sense that Monaco is that side in transition. You know, this isn't something that's come completely out of the blue. It's just I think if we look between the lines a little bit, we might see that. But that said, the attacking potential is still there, and I think that comes from Jardim as much as anyone. So we'll see how they develop.
It's also worth knowing that we're 8 games in, and they've only only, and they can't afford to do this, but they've only lost 1 and drawn 1. You know, the other 6 they've won, and performance-wise, then they're not at the level that they were last season. But I think there's that as well, just to take into account that they've still got that. It wasn't shown in it wasn't shown in the game against Nice. It wasn't shown in the game against Montpellier, but they still have that knack, which all top teams have, of just getting that result when it's needed. It's only 2 games where they have dropped points so far this season. So that's why I would reiterate that it's not panic stations yet. You know, I don't think there was any expectation on Monaco whatsoever to retain the Ligue and title. But it's just, I think, a little bit of food for thought for Jardim, certainly over this international break.
Yeah, and he did mention before the game that obviously it's quite a quick turnaround between Tuesday and Friday, but although you can argue the flight out measures into that, PSG had a shorter turnaround with their Saturday 4 o'clock kickoff. And I do have to mention one thing that I noticed, which feels like we're bashing him yet again with Djibril Sidibe, because he always seems to be the butt of most jokes. But I don't think I've seen a worse performance from anyone this season. He was abysmal. He might as well have been asleep. He was missing passes. He was not controlling the ball properly. He stopped runs abruptly when people were trying to pick him out, and they would sail out of bounds. I mean, a number of players struggled especially in the first half, to really capture any flow, which didn't help. But he was playing left back, and he was absolutely atrocious. I feel very, very sorry for him in one way. But just briefly to touch on the visitors, really, Rich, Montpellier, and they've had 2 really excellent draws in the last couple of weeks, and nicking one, especially away from home, was a real benefit. But they need to now translate that into even better results against the teams around them now, don't they?
They have to. You know, I had them at the start of the season as you know, a team potentially to take that 3rd relegation playoff spot. You know, overall, I just don't think that squad has the quality. But you know, who's to argue with a home draw again? Not only just a home draw against PSG, but you know, you're keeping a clean sheet against PSG as well, and then going to the champions and nicking a point. You know, you can't fault that. You know, what they need to do is make sure that, as well as picking up those perhaps slightly more unexpected points here and there, that they're winning those games that they should be winning. You know, they've got a couple of tricky games coming up. You know, they've got, once the international break's over, they've got Nice at home, they've got Saint-Etienne away. Okay, there are 2 other games where they might get an unexpected point, but then they're away at Guingamp and at home to Rennes, and then home to Amiens. So, sorry, Guingamp is a cup game, but they're at home to Rennes, they're at home to Amiens. So they're the games that they should be winning, and that's the real acid test, I think, for this Montpellier side. Is it's all well and good picking up a point against one of the big teams. If you're not beating your sort of rivals near the bottom, that point at home to PSG is worthless if you're then going to, you know, lose at home to Amiens.
Very, very important that they build off this, really. They looked pretty good, actually, to be fair, against Monaco. It's the best I've seen them this season of trying to create something, and they did cause some problems. They didn't just nick this either, as it might have seemed with a late goal. They really put up a fight against the Monaco side that did look really, really poor on the evening. But let's move on now to things happening this week, because the bat signal's in the air, at least for the French side again, because it's another international break and a pretty crucial one, really, for Les Bleus. France need 2 wins, really, to be absolutely sure of automatic qualification, with Sweden breathing down their necks, really. But Peter, has Didier Deschamps made some strange personnel choices again? I mean, we praised him last time out because he did bring some of these young players in, but there's a number of players now fit again, brought back into the fold again. It's a risk, isn't it?
It's a bit deja vu, isn't it? With Didier Deschamps. Yes. Is it a risk? Yes and no. Well, it's a risk for him anyway. They have to win these 2 games. They've got Bulgaria on Saturday, and then they play Belarus. Bulgaria away will not be an easy game. They'll know that Sweden will probably beat Luxembourg unless they put up another extraordinary display of both ability and fortune. But there are some strange decisions. I remember we did praise him last time, actually, didn't we? I think for on the whole picking a squad that we could get our heads around. Partly because there was no Moussa Sissoko, that was a key part. But here he is, he's back. I think his reasoning for including Moussa Sissoko was that he plays in different positions. So I play in a few different positions. So maybe if I've got French nationality, I might have a shot. In fairness to Sissoko, I actually think he's doing okay. I saw him against West Ham when he was playing through the middle, and I thought he did really, really well. That said, that doesn't necessarily mean he warrants inclusion in the French national squad. But then there's the asterisk, so it's Didier Deschamps. I think for me, the key omissions are Nabil Fekir, who has missed out in the place of Dimitri Payet, because according to Deschamps, Payet is more flexible. And Anthony Martial as well. I think he'll be disappointed that he hasn't earned himself a call-up. I've actually done a look at the numbers, because I know Deschamps loves a bit of... They've got to be playing regularly as well to have a shot at making the squad, which is why likes of Courtier haven't necessarily had a stab at it. So I looked at Sissoko's numbers, and they're better than they have been. So he's played 405 minutes, roughly 400 minutes. It's about 4.5 games this season. Martial's quite similar, actually, just below that, about 370 minutes. So again, there's a case there to be made. I was looking at Bakayoko because he hasn't been in contention for a little while. He has had an injury at the start of his time at Chelsea, but he has played more minutes than Sissoko, and he has played more consistently. And he was sensational against Atletico Madrid, I thought, as part of that Chelsea unit that shut down what is a fantastic Diego Simeone side. So I think he was unlucky not to be considered. He's not in discussions I've seen to make the squad behind the likes of Matuidi and Rabiot and Tolisso. But, I mean, Tolisso hasn't necessarily been in the best form with Bayern Munich since his move there. So I think he may be slightly unlucky, Bakayoko. But yeah, we go back to the same old, don't we, with these inclusions, and I think we'll talk about Jallet as well. But yes, I think another interesting stand-up point was Kurzawa making the squad, especially with the backdrop of blackmail. It seems he has put that to one side in his instance, but we won't do that for Benzema. But yes.
Strange. And then you start adding, I think Benjamin Mendy being unavailable as well has affected it to the point where Luca Dean is getting a call up just in case. But there's a number of different ones there. I mean, I've wrote an article earlier today on Payet versus Martial, and even though he's played fewer minutes, I can't see why you don't try and bring Martial with you. Even as an impact sub, he's scored 5 goals and assisted 4, and he's played less minutes than Payet has this season. I know some people will point to the fact that 1 goal was against Burton, 2 assists were against a CSKA Moscow side that were pretty terrible, but he has been really electric, and he's been even better off the bench, which if these games get close, if they get into worry situations, that's the kind of player, like the Luxembourg game, that's exactly the kind of player you really need to bring on as an impact. And Peter, I agree with you. Sissoko, I think maybe just about gets a pass on his current form. I think
it's a Didier Deschamps pass. It's not like a normal pass. It's just because it's Deschamps.
I'm letting him off on this one. Every single other time I would have absolutely been up in arms, but he has been better and he has been playing for Spurs. But let's talk about some of those defensive ones, really, Rich. And Christophe Jallet is another surprising one. He always seems to creep into these squads, but we always think about Koscielny, who is starting to play for Sevilla now and is playing reasonably decently. But the other one was the late one, which is Koscielny pulled out and Adil Rami's replaced him, when there's a wealth of French centre-backs that you could choose from. And especially, I think you mentioned on Twitter, actually, Kurt Zouma especially should be someone that should be possibly getting a look in, surely.
Just to touch on the Jallet issue, for me, it highlights the main positional problem, I think, with this French squad. And I've gone on about it for what's felt like years now, is there are really no standout young right backs coming through at the minute. There's one or two that have the potential, but there's a real dearth in quality right backs for France. Hence why Jallet is still getting picked. What's a little concerning maybe is, it may be concerning, it may not, depending on club level, and then Kurzawa's club level for Sidibe and Kurzawa's last outing for France, is that both cut short the training today. Both picked up knocks, so it remains to be seen whether they will be fit at all for both, if not one of the games coming up. But I mean, Adil Rami, I'm a big Deschamps defender, but I can't really defend the call-up of Adil Rami. He's part of a Marseille defence that is not playing well in the slightest. As I said on Twitter, Kurt Zouma should be there. You've got plenty of others, centre-back wise, who could have been called up. I'm not buying this, well, you need some experience in there, because I'm more than happy with Varane and Umtiti to be providing the experience that I need, as far as I'm concerned, for centre-backs. They're playing at in the world. They're very dependable. I don't need experience when I know that I've got those two as my centre-back pairing. So I can't defend the Rami call-up. I really can't. Unless Deschamps always had this childhood dream to meet Pamela Anderson, I have no idea. I can't defend. There's a couple. I'm very much on board with the Fekir and Martial should have been called up instead of Payet and probably Coman. I don't know what. Certainly, I'm not sure what Coman has done for France for quite a while now.
Or Bayern Munich.
I can't vouch. I can't vouch for what he does at Bayern Munich, but by all accounts, he's not a standout player. Payet hasn't been the same player, I don't think, since he got the move back to Marseille. Sissoko, and with the two of you, I can perhaps just about accept that. He's very much a player that, when playing for France, always seems to be this different player than at club level. He's one of Deschamps' sort of go-to trustworthy guy. He knows what he's going to get from Sissoko in that France squad, which is someone who's happy not to be an automatic starter and will play wherever you tell him to play, and seems to always put the effort in. And by and large, actually plays pretty well when he plays for France. But I very much would have liked to have seen Bakayoko in that squad. From all accounts, and from what I've seen and from what I've read, he's actually been playing better than Kante for large parts of the season so far. So I would certainly like to have seen him be given a shot here. But there are a couple of selections here that do make you think, come on, Didier, sort yourself out. But then the likes of Jallet, he has very little choice but to pick Jallet because, okay, Corsia may be, but who else?
That's very much so. Who else? Yeah, I'm also a little bit suspect on that. Maybe someone like Blaise Matuidi's maybe a little bit lucky now to get big heading in. He's not an automatic starter for Juve as much as he was not really an automatic starter for PSG, and his legs do seem to be slowly going away from him. And his bundle of energy was really the massive plus point for him for a long while. And once that starts to fade for him, I don't think he's anywhere near as effective, really. But yeah, how Kurt Zuma's not made the squad, I don't know. In all honesty, from what I've seen from Stoke City, and I've seen them about 3 times this season, twice with him in the squad, once where he was not in the squad, which is that Chelsea game, and he was man of the match by far in both the games that he played. He was absolutely terrific, a brick wall. He absolutely transforms that team defensively, even though they've got a fair amount of decent defenders. He's absolutely magnificent. And the game he doesn't play against Chelsea, what happens to Stoke City? Not much at the back, at least, anyway. So how he's not made it, he's going to be I'm very, very excited to see that his injury that was very, very serious has not curtailed what looked to be a very promising career. Chelsea have to be looking at him and going, they're bringing him back, maybe even in January if they want to, because he's a very, very special footballer still. And is another we can add to that list of many, many French centre backs.
And he can provide right back cover as well.
And he can play midfield if needs be as well. He's a very good footballer, really, and he's only getting better, which is a bit worrying. But just a bit of a focus really very quickly on these 2 games, and I just want to get both of your answers on this very quickly. They should be winnable games against Bulgaria. They've beat them before. Well, they drew to Bulgaria, so that's a little bit of the worry. But the Belarus one should really be a formality, you would think. But then again, Liechtenstein would have been a formality. But my question is really, if Didier Deschamps doesn't get the 2 victories and automatic qualification like a team with this talent should be, is it time for maybe the French football authorities to maybe think, should he stay? Rich?
Naturally, yeah. I think they will certainly look at that. You know, that his contract, I believe, is still only up until the World Cup. I know that there have been very strong reports that French Football Federation want to look at offering him I think it's a 2-year extension. But certainly, if they don't automatically qualify and have to get in via the playoffs, or worse still, don't qualify full stop, then absolutely, I will. I've been a huge fan of Deschamps as France coach for a number of years that he's held the position. I think what he's done for the squad overall, from where they were, certainly where he first came in to where they are now, you can only admire what he's done for the team. But yeah, ultimately, national team manager with the squad of players that he has, this team probably should have wrapped up qualification already. So arguably they've already, underperformed, let alone that dismal showing against Luxembourg. But I'll almost use the right back argument for France. I don't know who else would come in. I don't know who else France could look to appoint that would come in and take them to another level. If they deem that Deschamps is not the man to do it, who? And I ask this question, every time people query Deschamps. I genuinely couldn't give you a realistic, plausible alternative.
Peter, do you think he might at least come under serious scrutiny if they don't qualify?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, with the squad that France have, I completely agree with Rich. They should have wrapped up qualification by now. It's not a question of, they're dealing with a side that, have lost a few talents, so they're aging a bit and struggling post the Ribery generation. It's not like that at all. This is one of the, if not the greatest national pools out there. They are up there, and they should be one of the favourites for the World Cup with the squad they have. Especially when you consider some of the players who aren't in this squad who are injured, namely Pogba, Dembele. For France not to qualify would be would be a national disgrace, really. And I of course you applaud what Deschamps has done, but he's now almost been blessed with what can potentially be considered a golden generation of talent, and he really should be getting the most out of them. I have a couple of things I'd like to throw at you, Rich, just because my knowledge isn't as strong. But first of all, with France, there's something that I've always considered is why they, obviously it's Deschamps, but do you not think a back three could work? Obviously, this would require a different coach. I think I mentioned this last time we talked about France, but in fullback positions, they're not strong at all. It's quite clearly their weakest position. And at centre half, they have they have a trove of talent, essentially. I mean, take Rami aside, there is options beside him, but is that something that France could look at longer term? I don't think they could do it for these games, of course, because it takes time to adapt to a new system. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's obviously the sort of formation of the moment, isn't it? Playing the return of the three-man defence. I think they certainly they certainly got the personnel that could adopt that. It's whether, by playing 3 centre-backs, by playing 2 wing-backs, are you having to sacrifice another, attacking? But attacking, going forward, obviously, is where France are they're strongest in terms of the personnel that they have available. The only question, I think, is whether by playing that formation, are you sacrificing one of those positions? But it's not going to happen under Deschamps. But certainly I think with the problems that are coming with and by that I mean right back, particularly, it may be something that they are forced to look at. If once Jallet has sort of bitten the dust, and you're left with Corchia and some incredibly raw, incredibly untested, incredibly inexperienced options as your only alternative, unless you count Sidibe as a competent right back, which I hopefully do. It may be that's a formation that's sort of forced upon France. As I say, I just don't see it happening with Deschamps.
Yeah.
France will qualify. I can't see France not qualifying for this World Cup. And if they qualify for the World Cup, unless they go out in the group stage, I would fully expect Deschamps to sign a 2-year contract extension. But yeah, so in short, yeah, I would like to see them give it a go, and certainly they're going to have plenty of friendlies between now and the World Cup where they could try that. It wouldn't do any harm in a friendly match, but as we've seen so many times in friendly matches, and it's not the Deschamps thing; it's a broader coach, national coach thing. There's a real reluctance to experiment.
Yeah, I'm thinking when everyone's fit, you try and play a back three. You would, let's say, it's Umtiti, Varane, and Koscielny would probably be expected back three. Everyone fit, you probably have Mendy as a wing back and Sidibe as the other side, because although he's not great going defensively, you can take more of a risk with him being a wing back. But then to balance that out, you might have to play Conte and Bakayoko. Then you have to play Pogba, so he's playing as a part of that midfield three. And then it's 2 spaces for Griezmann et al. Probably Mbappe, but then where's Lamar, where's Martial, where's Fekir if he's in the squad, Lacazette, Giroud, Dembele, Cole. You start rattling off the list and it gets a bit insane. But let's finish off this evening with our Ligue and snapshots, really, and we'll try and keep this nice and brief. And I'll start with you, Peter. What's your Ligue and snapshot?
Just a couple of quick mentions. First of all, Nice-Marseille on Sunday night was a great festival of Ligue 1 football. We had some terrible tackling that should have been punished earlier, and then a red card that was well overdue in Luis Gustavo. We had missed penalties. We had multiple goals from shocking defending. And an entourage of mistakes. It was wonderful to watch, and it was thoroughly enjoyable. And Balotelli storming off at half-time, but didn't blow his lid. He's a new man at Nice, I think. And also another note that Asuakoto has now been sent off twice this season in 8 games. The first, of course, was ridiculously harsh against PSG, but and the second, a little bit more justified. I haven't seen the first yellow card, actually, so don't hold me to that one. But my overall snapshot is Caen. They definitely deserve a mention, and especially Remy Vercout, the keeper. They have conceded the least amount of goals this season, just 4, which is less than PSG. They've had 4 clean sheets, and right now they sit 4th, I think, if that's right. Yep. So they've had a terrific start to the season, helped by the fixture list, of course. But Patrice Guéron's men have started very well, and defensively, that's where it's at, and it's working for Claudio Ranieri as well.
Yeah, and we mentioned just before we came on that goal at Caen was a perfect summation of both clubs' seasons. If you've not seen it, it crosses into Ivan Santini, who does a great touch and a great little second touch to get away from the defender, but he shoots, it saves off the goalkeeper, hits Rami Ben Saibaini and goes in. That shows you Caen's luck and Rennes' misfortune, shall we say, all rolled into one magnificent moment. Rich, what's your snapshot?
Very quickly, it's just queries over video refereeing and video officiating. 2 incidences where I think those question marks were raised. In the Rennes game, Rennes had a shot on goal, looked to have caught Vercout slightly out of position, dived across, beat the ball out, and obviously the buzzer on the referee's arm gave it as a goal. Goal was awarded, great. Actually, this referee gets called to the sideline, replay gets shown. It's nowhere near crossing the line. I mean, it's barely even on the digital picture that they bring up to show whether the ball has crossed the line or not. It's that far outside of, the from a calm perspective, the right side of the line. So quite how on earth that buzzer went off to signal that it was a goal, I don't know. And then in the Nantes-Metz game, into injury time, Metz awarded a penalty, which arguably shouldn't have been awarded in itself. So whether the video referee can be involved there, there's a question there. But the Nolan Roux steps up, takes the penalty, scores. Referee, no, retake for encroachment, correct. Penalty's retaken. Nolan Roux skies it over the bar. There's more encroachment, but that's not given. And for me, so it's not video referee's fault because that's not called upon, but that's another example, perfect example where the video referee could have stepped in, triggered something, correct decision would have been made, because at that point you've got 2 very clear inconsistencies.
And in fairness, video referee might not have given that penalty in the first place in the one in
itself.
Yeah, which just exacerbates that argument, and it's worked quite nicely in both Bundesliga and in Italy, unless you're a Juventus fan who seem to hate it at the moment because it's giving decisions away against them. My Ligue 1 snapshot is a nice jovial one in it, which was the strange red card at Angers Lyon. Marcelo was sent off. He booked for a persistent fouling, really, in the aftermath, and he throws his arm nonchalantly in the air in annoyance, let's say, to the referee, a gesture of more of a this isn't going my way, rather than in anger or anything like that. But it happens to coincide exactly with the moment the referee's bringing his card down with his arm flailing upwards, hits the referee's card sky high, and the referee has without blinking even, just straight heads back to his pocket to show him a red. Marcelo's face is a picture. It shows maybe there's not enough humour in these Ligue 1 referees sometimes, but it's a tough one. He probably doesn't realise he doesn't mean it in that moment, because it does seem a little bit petulant when you see it in full motion. But in all honesty, a little bit silly. A little cooler head should have really maybe prevailed in the end, but it didn't in this time. And Marcelo walked and made for a very, very entertaining game at the Stade Raymond Copa. That's all we have for this week. My thanks to Rich, Peter, and everyone listening at home. There'll be no preview show this week, obviously, due to the international break, but the main show will be back at the same time, same place next week. Abianto and goodbye.